Welcome back to Silicon Bites. This episode, What Just Happened, is all about the targeting of Russia's grey fleet. It's a legal fleet of oil tankers that are helping to keep Putin's economy going and are helping to keep his war machine stocked with funds and resources. This is about Russia's blood oil and those who are willing to turn a blind eye and support it. Before we jump into the episode, thank you to everybody who helps out by becoming a patron or buying me a coffee. These are incredibly helpful ways to keep this work flowing. And as you all know, we produce episodes every day addressing the illegality of Putin's war, of Russia's war against Ukraine and against Europe. The number of incidents befalling Russia's sanctions-busting grey fleet of oil tankers is increasing. A pattern may be emerging, or these may be accidents that are inevitable for a vast fleet of vessels that have outlived their mandated lifespans. Or is Ukraine enforcing oil sanctions in the only way that works, by physically disabling Russian ships on the high seas? Today we will revisit the topic of oil sanctions by other means and ask if the Grey Fleet incidents are covert military cover and the strategic pain that may be inflicted on Moscow's war machine. We dig deeper into each maritime event, unpack Europe's response, and trace the illicit oil trading that is bringing in vast sums of money to Putin's war machine. Here is a breakdown of incidents involving Russian ships over the last year. Well, let's start one which probably is not an accident, but does involve a Russian tanker. This is the Eagle S. On the 25th of December 2024 in the Gulf of Finland, a suspected Shadow Fleet tanker, Eagle S, reportedly dragged its anchor across the seabed, damaging the Finland-Estonia Estlink 2 power cables and telecom lines. Finland's National Bureau of Investigation suspects sabotage. This clearly was not an accident. The vessel intentionally damaged the power line and 4 communications cables. This was reported in The Guardian and Wikipedia. It's a stark reminder that these oil tankers carry not only oil, they don't just risk the environment, but they risk systemic infrastructure attacks as well by a hostile state, Russia. Now let's turn to these incidents that at least have the trace of appearing that they may be some form of sabotage. The Koala is a Russian Grey Fleet vessel implicated in running illicit oil transport. It was targeted at the Russian port of Ust-Luga, and it suffered a major blast to its hull. Though this story did not feature prominently in the media at the time, this showed that suspected sabotage was starting to hit the Grey Fleet, and especially important because it is so close to Russia's own territorial waters. Another attack, and a significant one, occurred with the Sea Charm, the Sea Jewel, and Grace Ferrum in January to February 2025 in the Mediterranean. A trio of linked blasts used limpet mines, it is alleged, on vessels after they had called at Libyan ports. All of these occurred in the Mediterranean, and all ships had previously docked at either Russia or Libya. The next attack, Villamura, 27th of June 2025, off Libya. The Villamura, loaded with 1 million barrels, had its engine room flooded in a targeted explosion. Ukraine's HUR confirmed that this was part of Russia's Shadow Fleet, and the Kiev Post called this a devastating blast, and it alleged underscored Ukraine's lethal efficiency. And early in 2025, we had more of these Baltic limpet campaigns. Depending on which sources you read, it either involves 3 vessels or possibly as much to 5 vessels, 4 in the Med and 1 in the Baltic, using explosives, and all were tied to having visited Russian ports prior to the damage that they experienced. Now, the Villamora is the most recent example of this kind of damage to a Russian vessel. It may not be the last, however. Well, let's look at the EU response and inspection initiatives. These are the efforts by Europe to try to put at least some pressure on Russia's grey fleet. From June 23rd, 2025 to July 1st, Germany began questioning tankers in its Baltic and North Sea waters about their insurance, flagging, and pollution coverage. That does hit some of the Grey Fleet lifelines, but until you start blocking passage of vessels, until you start impounding vessels, it's difficult to see how this will fully disrupt Putin's blood oil trade. Denmark deployed maritime drones in the Baltic to monitor and safeguard undersea infrastructure. This was reaction to the story we talked about just a few minutes ago. And of course, this needs to scale up if the full extent of European infrastructure in its territorial waters is to be protected against Russian bad intent. France sent the reconnaissance ship Dupuy de l'Homme to intercept Russian communication signals in the Baltic as well. This was reported in Ukrainska Pravda. EU foreign ministers aim to sanction roughly 180 more vessels, adding to 350 already blacklisted. These ships make up to 85% of Russia's oil exports, fueling about a third of its national budget. Now, Russia is responding as you'd expect, and some of its vessels have started to include military escorts, covert ops. We've also talked about how Russian tankers themselves are actually providing cover for sabotage efforts, monitoring, and covert ops. In late June, two Shadow Fleet tankers and a Russian corvette sailed together through the English Channel, escorted by the military ship. So Russia really is starting to scale up protection for this lifeline for its economy and its war economy. In May, a Russian Su-35 fighter jet circled the unflagged tanker Jaguar during Estonia's attempt to intercept that vessel, clearly shielding the Grey Fleet operations. The ship General Skobalyov made headlines after being protected by a Russian corvette Mercury when a German Navy helicopter attempted to make an inspection. Mercury fired flares to keep that Western surveillance and inspection routines away from the vessel. Now, this grey fleet is absolutely vital, as we've said, for Moscow and its war economy, numbering between 400 and 700 aging tankers, often flagged by convenient registries, Liberia, Gabon, Cameroon, Cook Islands, etc., and owned through shell companies. These vessels evade the $60 per barrel oil cap, selling oil to China, India, UAE, Turkey, and to many of these at an extreme deep discount, especially when you compare it to the market rates prior to Russia's full-scale invasion, while Russia still earns around $60 to $90 per barrel due to inflated insurance and shipping markups. That's according to Reuters. But revenues have rebounded. Russian oil income already in 2022 rose 28% by the end of that year, the year in which the full-scale invasion had begun, and they have sought to sell and ship more oil since then. Of course, defense spending is now up to 6% of GDP in Russia. I mean, that is the official figure. I think unofficially it is likely to be far, far higher. These tankers carry roughly a third of Russia's national budget and 85% of its total oil exports. These explosions on board Russian ships may well not be accidents. There are strategic pressure points aimed at starving Putin of war cash. At least such attacks make complete strategic sense from the Ukrainian point of view. These tactics of covertly destroying Russian infrastructure, being extremely targeted in harassing and hitting its grey fleet, exposing the reliance of Russia on these covert vessels, this is exactly what Ukraine ought to do. The operations, if that's what they are smart, legally ambiguous, audacious, and high stakes. but they are necessary because Western weakness in closing down Russia's revenue sources and the failure to prevent the flouting of sanctions mean that this grey fleet and the blood oil it transports is a direct and existential threat to the existence of Ukraine. Ukrainian government and secret service would be negligent if they did not try to take out Russia's aging fleet of illegal oil tankers. Now, Europe is attempting to harass or start to put some pressure on this fleet, from a drone surveillance to ship interrogations to military inspections of vessels. Western powers are publicly confronting this challenge, but not with the required consistency and not at the demanded scale. Legal ambiguities persist, and of course, those are being used to hold European countries back. Things like flag state loopholes, insurance opacity, and the risk to cables and other infrastructure. It means that Europe is proceeding with extreme caution. And of course, there are always certain countries and organizations that are willing to collaborate with the terrorist regime in Moscow for profit, for self-interest, irrespective of the implications in this trade in blood oil for lives, especially Ukrainian lives. Russia's reply to all this is direct. It's deploying fighter jets, naval escorts, armed flares. It is escalating. There seems to be no limit on what it's prepared to do to escalate. It disguises these as routine logistics, but they are anything but routine. Let's conclude. I expect Ukraine, if indeed it is Ukraine behind this, to continue and indeed increase its harassment of Russia's grey fleet. This is a focused economic assault on Putin's lifeline, and it makes absolute sense in the context of the war. Ukraine is targeting the old tankers, the shell companies, the opaque registries, the insurance loopholes. Well, all of these need to be tackled more harshly by Ukraine's Western allies and partners. But enforcement of this process is uncoordinated. We need a united NATO EU force. We need a determined posture and transnational legal clarity. We need global insurance chokeholds to prevent Russia from operating this illegal and dangerous fleet. Putin's economic lifeline needs to be cut, especially as his economy is now showing signs that it is creaking. This is the time to increase pressure, not reduce it. This maritime war is silent but lethal. It could define Ukraine's survival and Europe's strategic resilience if we have the will to follow through. We must demand stronger inspections. We must support sanctions. We must push transparency, because every tanker that is struck down is a blow against Putin's tyranny, against Russia's imperial ambition, and is a step towards security and peace for Ukraine and indeed for Europe as well.